Thank you for the introduction, and as mentioned, we're going to do a panel discussion, but first I'm going to do a presentation. I'm representing the Division of Pediatric and Maternal Health. This is a division within the Office of New Drugs in the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, FDA. So we're very glad to have the opportunity to speak at the summit today. We were very fortunate as well to have joined for our recent public lactation workshop, Drs. Lawrence and Dr. Reese Stratham. So, let me get this. So with that, I'm going to forward through to the presentation. And really what I'm going to go through is where our thinking was and how we got to the lactation workshop. So I'll do a brief introduction, talking a little bit more about the division, talk about the recent developments, including the new pregnancy and lactation labeling rule, our considerations about post-marketing studies, and then we'll talk more about the lactation workshop itself. This presentation, opinions expressed in this presentation are my own and not necessarily that of the agency. Okay, so DPMH. DPMH, again, is located within the Office of New Drugs. Our team are composed of the maternal health team, the pediatrics team, and then the pediatric regulatory team. We are a consultative division. That means that we provide services to the drug review divisions. And our focus is looking at clinically relevant, evidence-based guidance, labeling, and other communications regarding the populations of pediatrics and females of reproductive potential in the guidance of medication use. So we work on labeling, which I'll talk about. We work on development of guidances, which help drug manufacturers consider the important points when moving forward in these populations. And we also engage with stakeholder groups to make sure that we are current and are pursuing the shared interests. Okay, the pregnancy and lactation labeling rule. This was a rule that was a long time in coming and became effective last June. It arrived because of continuing difficulties with the pregnancy letter categories. The letter categories were being misinterpreted, misunderstood as actual graded scale of risk, and some difficulties in having drugs in a similar class given different categories. So this rule now is removing the pregnancy letter category from all prescription drugs. This will be a gradual process that occurs up until 2020. There is another part of this, in which is not just the removal of the letter category, but it is updating the structure and the content of the labeling. It is most specific to drugs that have been approved after June 2001. It is an extension of the physician's labeling rule. If you've noticed that that's a new format now that we have a highlight section that gives you the most important information at a quick glance, and then further goes into the prescribing information. So these additional content and formatting requirements apply to those products, and they must now comply with the PLLR. The intent of the PLLR is to provide better information for decision making to the prescribers when they are seeking to prescribe medication to pregnant or lactating women. It is a more complete statement of known risks based on the current available data. Human data is added when it's available. Animal data is now put in the context of human exposure, so it can be better understood by the prescriber. And when there is no data, it explicitly states so. But again, this is all based on what current data is available. Okay, so this graphic is showing the changes. The former labeling had 8.1 pregnancy, 8.2 labor and delivery, and 8.3 nursing mothers. 8.1 remains so, but now labor and delivery is underneath 8.1. 8.3 is changed. It's now 8.2 and renamed lactation. Then we have this new dedicated subsection 8.3, which is seeking to address the concerns for females and males of reproductive potential. The slide goes further into that structure. Again, 8.1 pregnancy will have 4 headings. Pregnancy registry is where you would find information if you have a patient that may be enrolled in our pregnancy registry. So if there is one available, the information will be provided here. Then you have the risk summary, which is now this integrated review of the available information that tells about what the risk may be. So this is now what's replacing what was the pregnancy category. There are clinical considerations that has a number of other headings, and data. The last 3, risk summary, clinical considerations, and data, similarly are in lactation, same structure for the lactation section. And then for 8.3, females and males of reproductive potential, well, that's for concerns regarding pregnancy testing and contraception, especially when you have a drug that has teratogenic potential, and also if there are known effects of the drug on fertility. Okay, lactation, as mentioned, 3 headings. The risk summary is the required sections. The other sections may not be populated if there is not information to include there. The risk summary will differ depending on whether the drug is systemically absorbed. The most information will be under drugs that are systemically absorbed, of course. Presence of drug in the milk, effects of the drug on the breastfed infant, effects of the drug on milk production. Those 3 items must be addressed within the label. If it's not known, it must be stated that it's not known. When we have more information on the presence of drug in the milk, these are the other pieces we would like to capture: the concentration in the milk, the actual or estimated infant daily dose. The last piece is the risk-benefit statement. So I'll show that to you in a bit. That's a required statement for particular situations. Now, if this is a drug that has no systemic absorption, there'll simply be one statement under risk summary stating that the drug is not systemically absorbed and therefore effects in the breastfed infant are not expected. Okay, so here is an example. This is a risk summary. It starts out talking about the human data. Limited published literature based on breast milk sampling from 5 mothers reports that the drug name is present in human milk. Gives you some more information. Goes down, says there are no reports of adverse effects on the breastfed infant or effects on milk production. Then there are some unknown risks. And in the end, we have the benefit risk statement, which is really saying the physician should consider developmental and health benefits of the breastfeeding mother. The developmental and health benefits of breastfeeding should be considered along with the mother's clinical need for a trade name or any potential adverse effects on the breastfed infant from trade name or the underlying condition. I'm just going to bring that up a little bit more so folks can see. Okay. However, in situations where you have some safety concerns, you want to be a little bit more clear about that. And so the labeling, what we're trying to do is communicate that better when there is a concern. So for example, this is another drug in which there are concerns. There was demonstration of presence within the breast milk, and there may be some potential serious adverse reactions. At the very end, you'll see that we have, because of the potential for serious adverse reactions, including respiratory depression and excess sedation, breastfeeding is not recommended. So this is language that we are working. This is just an example, but this is language that we're working on to more clearly describe risk when there is a concern. When there is a concern, however, we are not including that required statement you saw previously. Okay. All right, so the other headings under this section, again, clinical considerations. This is a place where you would find information regarding minimizing exposure to the breastfed infant. This would be a case of, if within a certain period of pumping and discarding, women can return to the regular breastfeeding practices. That would be a space where the information would be found. Also, if there's a need to monitor the breastfed infant for certain adverse reactions, then it will be placed here. The data section would further describe the data that is known. Clinical lactation studies would be in this position. Animal data would be in this position only if there are no human data. Okay, so only one type of data would be found under lactation. Okay, so as we've been working through these labels, and now, it's been over a year we've been working through it. I think we have maybe 100 labels that we have approved. We're going to see a lot more as we move further along 2018 through 2020. And as we're going through, we've found a data dilemma. Most of the information that we learn from use in lactating mothers comes from the post-marketing space. That means after the drug is approved, there may not necessarily be a specific study. It's more case reports and what's published in the literature. And so there's not a lot often collected. Also, when we do put information, when we have no information and we put this new structure in place, it does not necessarily improve the understanding to the prescriber. We find that having a few reports that state an absence of risk may be reassuring. However, it cannot be extended and generalized to the population. So we find ourselves with having a data gap that needs to be filled. The sparse information on experience of a particular drug in lactating women often leads physicians to recommend discontinuation of breastfeeding unnecessarily. So we really need to get more information, more data, and we also need to increase awareness of this unmet need for data. Okay. So that's the first thing we struggled with. This next part is considering gathering information from post-marketing studies. So usually when we are considering a clinical lactation study, we're looking at if the drug is absorbed systemically. That's key. Often we are identifying if there's a potential safety risk. Well, is there anything known from the animal data? Is there toxicity with the nursing rat pups? Is the mechanism of action concerning? Are we looking at a cytotoxic drug of which there would be concerns with exposure to the infant? Have there been serious adverse reactions demonstrated in the adults who are already exposed in the clinical trials? Another consideration is also if the drug is anticipated to be used in females of reproductive potential. So a recent look at clinicaltrials.gov found that there were very few lactation studies. There are 8 documented. And so clearly there's a need for more clinical lactation studies. We were left with considering how to get this need filled, how to advise, what methods and study designs are needed to get to this data. We do have a draft guidance published in 2005, Clinical Lactation Studies, Study Design, Data Analysis, and Recommendations for Labeling. It describes 2 study designs, both of which provide an opportunity for collecting information on the concentration of drug in the breast milk, adverse effects on the infant, as well as the effects on milk production. The guidance is currently in revision. It's been 10 years, more than 10 years now since it's been published, and the work that's being done will lead to it being reissued as a draft guidance and not as a final guidance. So this is really an opportunity for us to make sure that we have the most current information on methodology and study designs from those folks who are active in the field in doing the research. So we felt it was important to bring the group of experts together and to have discussion in a public lactation workshop. Okay. This workshop was held at the end of April. We had participants on the panel from industry, academia, advocacy groups, professional groups, government. The purpose was to focus on a review of the current approaches to the collection of data, discuss novel approaches to improve the quality and quantity of the data, and discuss strategies to communicate safety information related to maternal use of medications during lactation. So I'm going to move to some of those key discussions. It was clear from the panel, as we understood, there is a lack of the necessary data to really inform any risk within the majority of drugs being used during the period of lactation. However, this discussion led to being careful about what data we were using. The lack of data should not justify using inadequate data to inform the risk. For example, as I mentioned, case reports alone are not sufficient to describe the risk. We cannot confirm an absence of a risk based on a report in five women. Physicochemical properties alone are not sufficient. And when I say physicochemical, I'm talking about molecular weight of the drug, lipophilicity, other concerns, other properties of the particular drug, which sometimes have been looked at to predict, but there always was a missing portion of that for the accuracy of the prediction. So we cannot rely on those physicochemical properties alone. Also, although the animal data do help us to understand whether or not the drug becomes present within the breast milk and could inform us about any particular toxicity effects, understanding the levels of which the drug is present in the breast milk cannot be accurately predicted from the animal data due to differences in transport mechanisms. What was promising was, at minimum, clinical pharmacology data would be needed. Right? There were some discussions about pharmacokinetic modeling, and this was from, I think this was Hill's lab, but it was to me, I found it very interesting because where they were moving forward, we're trying to, again, be able to predict relative infant dose and concentrations, but in the end, even with their modeling, they needed to go back and verify with actual information from human milk. So you will always need a clinical pharmacology component, actual study within a woman to get the most accurate information. That together, supplemented by the other information that we could obtain, adverse events in animals, adverse events reported in case reports. Together, all of this information can help to build a picture about safety of use of drugs during lactation. So it was clear that clinical lactation studies are the key. So now we need to look at developing pathways to further encourage or require these kind of studies getting done. It was also concluded that there needs to be a reinvigoration of efforts to clearly communicate the benefits of breastfeeding, not just to OB practitioners, but as was discussed in yesterday's presentations, this spans healthcare providers, pharmacists, medical students, and even better communication to the consumers, the community itself. And lastly, increasing awareness and consistency of the trusted sources of where this information would live. So this was also a good part of our discussion. Okay. So in conclusion, following the lactation workshop, again, we clearly recognize there are significant gaps of data. Our plans for future directions is developing pathways to increase the number of lactation studies itself. We also are focusing on trying to complete the revisions to the 2005 guidance, and of course reflecting upon all of the comments and recommendations that were placed from the lactation workshop itself. We are currently in the process of writing a white paper that would reflect the lactation workshop. We're working through the implementation of the PLLR and improving, trying to better communicate the benefits of breastfeeding and labeling. And lastly, we continue to work to increase awareness among stakeholders. And this is not only for lactation, but also we continue to have a need in pregnancy as well to understand drug use and risks there. So that is the end of my presentation. I thank you for your attention. And I would welcome Drs. Tassinari and Nguyen to join me up front.